Verses 14 to 20. The church increased in number, v. 14 believers were the more added to the Lord, and no doubt joined themselves to the church, when they saw that God was in it of a truth, even multitudes both of men and women. They were so far from being deterred by the example that was made of Ananias and Sapphira that they were rather invited by it into a society that kept such a strict discipline. Believers are added to the Lord Jesus, joined to Him, and so joined to His mystical body, from which nothing can separate us and cut us off, but that which separates us and cuts us off from Christ. Many have been brought to the Lord, and yet there is room for others to be added to Him, added to the number of those that are united to Him, and additions will still be making till the mystery of God shall be finished, and the number of the elect accomplished. Notice is taken of the conversion of women as well as men, more notice than generally was in the Jewish church, in which they neither received the sign of circumcision nor were obliged to attend the solemn feasts, and the court of the women was one of the outer courts of the temple. But, as among those that followed Christ while He was upon earth, so among those that believed on Him after He went to heaven, great notice was taken of the good women. The apostles had abundance of patience, and gained abundance of reputation both to themselves and their doctrine by the cure of them all, v. 15, 16. So many signs and wonders were wrought by the apostles that all manner of people put in for the benefit of them, both in city and country, and had it. In the city, they brought forth their sick into the streets, for it is probable that the priests would not suffer them to bring them into the temple to Solomon's porch, and the apostles had not leisure to go to the houses of them all. And they laid them on beds and couches, because they were so weak that they could neither go nor stand, that at the least the shadow of Peter, passing by, might overshadow some of them, though it could not reach them all, and, it should seem, it had the desired effect, as the woman's touch of the hem of Christ's garment had, and in this, among other things, that word of Christ was fulfilled, greater works than these shall you do. God expresses His care of His people, by His being their shade on their right hand, and the benign influences of Christ as a king are compared to the shadow of a great rock. Peter comes between them and the sun, and so heals them, cuts them off from a dependence upon creature sufficiency as insufficient, that they may expect help only from that Spirit of grace with whom He was filled. And, if such miracles were wrought by Peter's shadow, we have reason to think they were so by the other apostles, as by the handkerchiefs from Paul's body, ch. 19:12, no doubt both being with an actual intention in the minds of the apostles thus to heal, so that it is absurd to infer hence a healing virtue in the relics of saints that are dead and gone. We read not of any cured by the relics of Christ Himself, after He was gone, as certainly we should if there had been any such thing. In the country towns, multitudes came to Jerusalem from the cities round about, bringing sick folks that were afflicted in body, and those that were vexed with unclean spirits, that were troubled in mind, and they were healed every one. Distempered bodies and distempered minds were set to rights. Thus opportunity was given to the apostles, both to convince people's judgments by these miracles of the heavenly origin of the doctrine they preached, and also to engage people's affections both to them and it, by giving them a specimen of its beneficial tendency to the welfare of this lower world. Never did any good work go on with any hope of success, but it met with opposition. Those that are bent to do mischief cannot be reconciled to those who make it their business to do good. Satan, the destroyer of mankind, ever was, and will be, an adversary to those who are the benefactors of mankind, and it would have been strange if the apostles had gone on thus teaching and healing and had had no check. In these verses we have the malice of hell and the grace of heaven struggling about them, the one to drive them off from this good work, the other to animate them in it. The priests were enraged at them, and shut them up in prison, v. 17, 18. Observe, 1. Who their enemies and persecutors were. The high priest was the ringleader, Annas or Caiaphas, who saw their wealth and dignity, their power and tyranny, that is, their all, at stake, and inevitably lost, if the spiritual and heavenly doctrine of Christ should get ground and prevail among the people. Those that were most forward to join with the high priest herein were the sect of the Sadducees, who had a particularly enmity to the gospel of Christ, because it confirmed and established the doctrine of the invisible world, the resurrection of the dead, and the future state, which they denied. It is not strange if men of no religion be bigoted in their opposition to true and pure religion. How they were affected towards them, ill-affected, and exasperated to the last degree. When they heard and saw what flocking there was to the apostles, and how considerable they were become, they rose up in a passion, as men that could no longer bear it, and were resolved to make head against it, being filled with indignation at the apostles for preaching the doctrine of Christ, and curing the sick, at the people for hearing them, and bringing the sick to them to be cured, and at themselves and their own party for suffering this matter to go so far, and not knocking it on the head at first. Thus are the enemies of Christ and his gospel a torment to themselves. Envy slays the silly one. 3. How they proceeded against them. v18 They laid their hands on them, perhaps their own hands, so low did their malice make them stoop, or, rather, the hands of their officers, and put them in the common prison, among the worst of malefactors. Hereby they designed to put a restraint upon them, though they could not lay anything criminal to their charge worthy of death or of bonds, yet while they had them in prison they kept them from going on in their work, and this they reckoned a good point gained. Thus early were the ambassadors of Christ in bonds, to put a terror upon them, and so to drive them off from their work. The last time they had them before them, they only threatened them, ch. 421, but now, finding that this did not do, they imprisoned them, to make them afraid of them, to put a disgrace upon them, and therefore they chose to clap them up in the common prison, that, being thus vilified, the people might not, as they had done, magnify them. Satan has carried on his design against the gospel very much by making the preachers and professors of it appear despicable. God sent his angel to release them out of prison, and to renew their commission to preach the gospel. The powers of darkness fight against them, but the Father of lights fights for them, and sends an angel of light to plead their cause. The Lord will never desert his witnesses, his advocates, but will certainly stand by them, and bear them out. The apostles are discharged, legally discharged, from their imprisonment, v19. The angel of the Lord by night, in spite of all the locks and bars that were upon them, opened the prison doors, and, in spite of all the vigilance and resolution of the keepers that stood without before the doors, brought forth the prisoners, cv 23, gave them authority to go out without crime, and led them through all opposition. This deliverance is not so particularly related as that of Peter, ch. 12:7, etc., but the miracle here was the very same. Note, there is no prison so dark, so strong, but God can both visit his people in it, and, if he pleased, fetch them out of it. This discharge of the apostles out of prison by an angel was a resemblance of Christ's resurrection, and his discharge out of the prison of the grave, and would help to confirm the apostles' preaching of it.